Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this study, our weekly study in the Hebrew Bible, and doing some Hebrew word studies and word searches. So many of you may be new to this, and hopefully you will be as excited about it as I am, and that I can pass that along to you and show you how the tools are available for all of us to very easily search out these verses and gain just a deeper insight, deeper meaning into the Hebrew language and from God's heart to us through this beautiful language that God created. So I'm going to go ahead right now and share my screen, and you will see what's on the screen here is Bible Hub. Um, and Bible Hub has been fantastic for us to use to unpack these verses. And we are in First Samuel chapter 18, starting with the first verse. Now, it was 2 weeks since we had our last session in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and just as a segue in, would help us to understand that David had just killed Goliath and had this very strange interaction with Saul afterwards, King Saul, and where King Saul pretended or gave us the impression that he didn't know David and didn't. We talked about that, very challenging verses to go through, and that is what chapter 17 ended with, that they had this discussion. Now, the Bible doesn't record a lot of the words, just a few of the highlights, but we see in verse 1 of chapter 18 that there's something that lets us understand that this was quite a long conversation with some very in-depth discussion that was happening, and we learn that from the Hebrew. And so just reading this Hebrew, remember, it reads from right to left, and it's Vayehi kekaloto ledaber. And so it says, when he had finished speaking to El Shaul, to Saul. And what's interesting here is looking at this word kekaloto, um, means he had finished speaking. It's in a PL form, which means that these are very strongly put words, words with a lot of feeling behind them. And then the word used to describe the words that were spoken is le daber. And those of you who've been in a few classes before hear me speak about this quite often, because it's one of the key points of really gaining an understanding of the verbiage and the words in the verses that are spoken, that when you see someone speaking in English, you cannot gain much in the way of intensity or feeling unless there are extra words added. But in Hebrew, beautiful language that it is, we can pick up that there are two words in Hebrew used to describe language of being spoken, words being spoken. One is Amar, which is more of an everyday conversation, which are words that are spoken, but may not wouldn't come from the heart or be very heartfelt or meaningful words. And then there is Daber, which are words that are have more meaning behind them, spoken from the heart, intense words. And so we hear that the Bible is using the words that David spoke to Saul were in a PL form with the intensity of how he delivered them. But then the words themselves are daber, which are words from the heart, and it is also in a PL form. So these were very intense words. And you can imagine that the battle with Goliath obviously was a very intense battle, the one that followed after, with the Israelites chasing the Philistines and conquering over them. It doesn't get any more intense than that. And so here David was obviously anointed by God to fight the battle. And I think you pick up some of that in his conversation with Saul, that his emotions were high. He was speaking from his heart and was saying these things to Saul. And there's a number of incredible things that happen in these next few verses between David and Saul, and between David and Saul's son, whose name is Jonathan. And so this latter part of this verse said that, when he was finished speaking with El Shaul to Shaul, it uses the word Vanephesh Yehonatan, and that is the soul of David and Jonathan were knit together. Now, the word Jonathan is actually a compound word, and we're going to use the tools we have in Bible Hub to just open that up, and you hover over the number. Every Hebrew word has a number assigned to it that is handy for research and comparison. So when you hover over it, it's a hyperlink. You click it, it opens up, and it breaks down the name of Jonathan into the way it's pronounced in Hebrew of Yehonatan. And the first part is the Yud and the He and the Vav, which is part of the Tetragrammaton, or the four letters that comprise the ineffable or not pronounceable name of God to the Jewish people in the Hebrew Bible. And we know it as Yahweh. But again, we're not completely sure. There's only about maybe a 90% consensus that it's pronounced that way, because the Hebrew does not have any vowels in it the way it's originally written. And it's only was in the last, actually was in the first century, ninth century, excuse me, that the vowel pointings were put in, and no one is for sure um, how it's supposed to be pronounced. So you could take these four letters and combine them with any one of the five vowels that exist and come up with numerous different ways to pronounce this. And again, our point here is not to belabor this, because we can't come to a conclusion, but we can recognize that this name of Jonathan has the name that we will just for here say is Yahweh in the beginning of it. And then his last part, which is Nathan, we know people named Nathan. In Hebrew is called Natan, means to give. Anytime someone gives something, you're giving something to another person, they will use the word Natan in the Hebrew. And so this is God has given is the name of Jonathan, which again is just a beautiful name to learn that meaning behind it. And so it says that the Nephesh in Hebrew, again, another fascinating study that there's no conclusive results to, but we are comprised of spirit, we're comprised of body, but then we know we have a soul, and then we also have the Spirit of God filling us like they did on the day of Pentecost. So all of this is going on inside of us, and it becomes quite a challenge to identify and to categorize these, and to be able to just understand what is really going on inside of us. So when the Bible talks about some of these terms, it gives us a little bit better indication than it does in the English. English will use soul, English will use spirit, but in the Hebrew, we have the nephesh spoken of here, of that soul of Jonathan. And then as we move further on in the verse, we have a beautiful word of nikshara, which is the term of was knit. Then you have the word benephesh. The bait on the front is a preposition. It means in or on or to. And then you see the noon pay sheen is the nephesh, and then you have the word for David, which is the Dalet Vav, and the Dalet again with the vowel pointing of the David. And so the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Well, of course, there's been many sermons preached, much teaching about this friendship and this brotherhood, if you will, of Jonathan and David. But I think looking at this word for knit is where we're going to just gain a little bit deeper insight. We see that this is again a verb, and remember there are 7 different types of verb conjugations in the Hebrew. There's the kal verb, which is just the standard no meaning behind or no intensity behind it, not a lot of mood behind it, and it is in an active form. Its counterpart in a passive form is called Nifal. And so what's interesting here is that the soul of Jonathan and the soul of David were knit together, but in a Nifal, or a somewhat passive way, meaning that something caused this to happen. And and so the intensity is not an intense form like the PL. In fact, I heard a teacher say that these 7 verb conjugations help relate relationship, that when you move from the cal to finally the hip-ial, which is the 7th one, the intensity of relationship increases. So this nifal would be actually a very weak, one of the weakest relationship forms that you could use out of the verb conjugations. And so this soul of David was knit, but it was held together in a way that, again, is very beautiful, but it wasn't an intense form like sometimes you think of when a man and a woman are in love with each other and they have this type of romantic relationship. This is not given any of that kind of understanding here. Unfortunately, I have heard some groups pick up this up and say that David and Jonathan had what some would consider a non-traditional, non-appropriate relationship, and point to that here. But again, I don't believe the Hebrew leads us in that direction in any way, because the intensity was not that strong. It was a friendship, and it means that their souls, again, the term soul being knit together, this term for soul is used for people, and it's also used for animals. And this is where the Hebrew and the English understanding and the Jewish understanding versus the Christian understanding take a little bit of a different pathway. We don't understand the difference between soul and spirit. It's very challenging, but we do see in the Bible that it talks about animals having a nephesh, people having a nephesh. It says that Jesus had a nephesh. And so what the understanding is in the Hebrew uh, teachings is that this nephesh is the part of your body that keeps your body alive. It's what causes your lungs to breathe, to function, causes your heart to beat. It is the part of your body that tells you when you're hungry and motivates you to get some food. If you're hurting, it motivates you to get some help for the hurting. It is something that we share with animals because it is what keeps our human body alive. It's what keeps us to a part to where we can survive. It's gives us survival instincts. And so when they're saying that the soul of Jonathan and the nephesh of Jonathan and the nephesh of David were joined together, or we'll unpack the word knit in a moment here, but it's really talking about the ideas of what it took to operate in the kingdom that they were in, to do God's work, to that they thought alike. Sometimes, as that movie goes, we finished each other's sentences or sandwiches. If you watch the one movie, that they knew enough about what each one was doing that they could predict what the other one was going to say. And this is the indication that we have from this word nephesh and the how it's used with David. I'm going to look at this word for knit together because this is really, really interesting. Again, this is not knitting like creating a garment or something, but it's an intertwining. The translators had a few different types of English words to choose from here. They could have chosen to bind, to come in a league together, which I think is more appropriate. Thinking of the nephesh being involved and what they were doing and the battles they fought and how they worked together in the kingdom, that they were in a league together. Now we're going to take a look at a little bit older Aramaic dictionary called the Dictionary of the Targumim. by Marcus Jastrow. And in here, we take a look at this word for um, to strengthen. It means it's the kuf shin resh, where they got the word knit from, but its first use was in Genesis chapter 30, verse 41, where it talked about to be strengthened. And I think that's a very applicable um, understanding here, that Jonathan and David strengthened each other, that their nephesh, or their main purpose, what made them tick, if you will, what motivated them, what they had so much in common, they strengthen each other, as iron sharpen iron, according to the cliche. And so I like how the Aramaic just gives us a little bit different understanding. And there's quite a long entry in here of the different forms of the PL, the Nifal, that it could be used. Yes, it's knotted together, is another meaning of it, but I like the understanding that they strengthened one another. And so going back to that verse, that the nephesh of Saul strengthened the nephesh, excuse me, the nephesh of Jonathan strengthened the nephesh of David. And then we come to two other words that are very, very interesting. It said that David loved Jonathan as his own soul, or his nephesh. But what you're going to see here are two words. One are in brackets. This is the one on the right side. And then there are a word that's in parentheses. And you'll see that the word that's in parentheses has a translation underneath saying, and loved him. It has a Strong's number above it of 157, but the word in the brackets has nothing about it. And this is found very often in the Hebrew Bible, in the Hebrew scriptures, and is called, has a actual terminology for it called a kere and a kethiv, which really means what is written versus what is spoken and what is understood. And this again points to the interesting understanding of the Hebrew Bible, is that there are words written in the margins, there are words written in parentheses and brackets that are not translated by the English translators. And when they do that, in English, you never get to see it. You don't know that these things exist. But looking at the Hebrew, you do get to see it, that there are these words. And the first one, Vayehavo, is doesn't have any vowels on it. And the reason that it's in brackets is it's in a form that the Hebrew translators could not understand. It's not in a form that's used today. It's not a word that's spelled like any word that are in any of the dictionaries, but the word in the brackets are what they thought that this word meant. And so it's very similar. It has very similar consonants. It just has a different consonant in one place and different vowel pointings to help it sound like a word, or mean like a word that is in common use, that they can you know, identify with and translate. And so this again is very interesting. It would allow us to actually maybe do a little bit of a study on why this word was different. Was it something that was done intentionally? Was it something that was done accidentally? And the later copyists of the as the scribes copied the verses, they left it in. Again, a lot of mystery behind it, but we know that because the Jewish people did not want to make a mistake or alter the scriptures, they left both words in and allowed us to be able to search this out and study it on our own, but it is possible if you do it in the Hebrew. And so the word means that he loved him. Again, there's nothing profound about this word love, but it has a wide variety of meanings. It just means that they were brothers in their thoughts and in their affection for each other. And so that's where we're going to stop with verse 1. Again, I hope you can see, as I am just amazed every time I study the Bible and in the Hebrew language, the hidden meanings that are there and the richness that can be brought out to get a better understanding than what the translators were able to do in the limitations of the English language. And again, I pray that you are strengthened by it and encouraged by it, because God has left us such a beautiful, beautiful legacy in this. So I pray God's blessing upon you all this week, and pray that you just keep studying God's word, and look forward to meeting with you next week. God bless you. Bye bye.